Power Fab, it is time to start talking about our first machine tool, the Metal Lathe. So the Metal Lathe is the quintessential machining tool. It is probably the oldest machining tool. And no matter how expensive, how large, how fancy, or how simple a lathe is, it does one main thing. The lathe removes material from work by rotating the work into a cutting tool, and that cutting tool either moves into or along that piece of work. So the material is held in the lathe, it is spun, and then a tool moves into that piece of material and removes part, makes it smaller. There are three main parts of the lathe that we're going to talk about today. There are also three functional categories. Those three functional categories. First, driving the lathe. Second is holding and rotating the work, the material. And third, holding and moving the cutting tool. So in this video, we're going to go over the three main parts of the lathe that fall into those three functional categories and just talk about it. In the next one, we will demonstrate and use it. So we start up here. This right here is the headstock. In the headstock, there is a motor that controls the spindle, so it spins, right? And we have a few different controls on our headstock to drive the lathe. The first thing is that we need to control the speed at which the work is rotated. So there's a motor going at a constant rate, and we need to control that speed through a gearbox. If you've ever driven a manual transmission car, or if you ever want to, you know that we use a transmission to control the speed. Unlike in a car, this transmission can only be changed when the lathe is stationary. Never try to change gear while you're moving. This right here is where we can control the speed. You'll see a small little chart that says spindle speed, and then A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. I can look on here, see A1 is 270, so A1, I'm at 270 RPM, rotations or revolutions per minute. It goes all the way up to 1400. A2 is 1400. So this goes from 70 to 1400, 1400. Let's see, I'm going to go with A3. Lock into place. And if I wanted to change to B3, right there, want A3. And to help to get it into gear, I can rotate this thing right here, which we'll talk about in a minute. I don't hear any grinding, so that's good. This lever right here controls the direction of the lead screw, which comes out of the headstock. We'll talk about what this does a little bit later on, but right here it rotates one way, now it rotates the other way. Below that, we have some buttons. These buttons are what you press to actually turn the lathe on. So this first one, the red one, says reset. That's important. This is a safety feature. When you press it in, it turns off. So to turn it on, you rotate it up just a little bit, and it pops out. When that happens, you'll see this green power light up. Next, there's a power start right there. You might not be able to hear it, but when you press that, there's a click. A capacitor just got ready to start the motor. Now I'm in gear, but I need to check that I'm actually in gear. You can rotate it to make sure, but if things aren't lined up perfectly and I go to turn this on, we could have an issue. So this black button right here, it starting to wear off, but it says inch or inches. And what I can do is just press that, and it turns the motor on just for a second, just to make sure that everything's lined up. So, sounds smooth, no massive gears grinding, so we're good. I'm going to keep talking about some things, so I'm going to turn things off by pressing the reset button. But this is how we really power up the lathe. Below that, we have another chart and a few more handles that we can adjust. One of the many uses of the lathe is cutting threads. And here, if you can, I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but you can set the speed and everything to cut certain threads by adjusting these knobs. Attached to the headstock is what we use to hold the work. This right here is called a chuck. And we have two types of chuck. The first one that's attached to our lathe 99.9% of the time, what you're probably going to use, especially in this class, is a 3-jaw universal chuck. This chuck is just like a Jacob's chuck on a drill press or even in a handheld drill. There are 3 jaws that move in unison to grab onto something. This is great for round stock, like this piece, because it's all even, it's all symmetrical, so you can grab onto it with a 3-jaw universal chuck. That's what I would do here. Insert the work. There is a chuck key in the back of the lathe. I doubt this is on video, but there's a nice little tool rack on the back of the lathe. This fits into the chuck, and I can tighten down those 3 jaws, move in unison to tighten it. I'm going to tighten it all the way around just to make sure it's even. When I'm done, I am putting this chuck key back where it belongs. 1, to keep things organized, but 2, when this starts, if that chuck key is still there, it's flying out. And it could break a watch, it could hit you, it could hit someone who's not even using the lathe. It could if it's just dangerous. Just take it out, right? So, this is the chuck. What if we want to turn something that isn't round? Or if we need to do something that's not in the center of the work? Well, for that we have another type of chuck. This is called a 4-jaw independent chuck. Now here, there are 4 jaws instead of 3, so that's the first half of the name. And it's called an independent chuck because each one of these jaws moves independently of one another, which means that we can hold on to anything, basically. If it's an awkward shape, if it's an oval, if it's a hexagon, anything, we can grab onto it by moving these 4 jaws independently. So this was the headstock. This is where the spindle, the speed control, and the chuck are located. Down on the opposite end of the lathe is the tailstock. Sometimes it's easy to think of the names like a horse, the head, and the tail. Headstock, tailstock. The tailstock is used for a few different things. The main 2 operations that we use it for are for drilling and then turning between centers. When I'm turning something that's nice and short and stubby, we don't need to worry about this. But if we were turning something really long, like an axle for a transportation project maybe, the end, the farther away from the headstock that is, it might get wobbly, and we want to avoid that. So we use something called a live center. This is a live center right here. There are some ball bearings inside, so this little bit spins. There is a tapered shank on there that fits into the tailstock. It's called a live center because it spins. If you've done some wood turning, you might have heard of a dead center, we don't use a dead center on the metal lathe. We only use live centers. To insert this into the tailstock, I have this sticking out, and the taper fits in. There's a handle back here. Down is unlocked, and I can slide it along these ways. Fits up to my work. Lock this in place. And now I can rotate my work, and it spins with the live center. Now the other operation that we use the tailstock for is drilling. And what we have here is a 3-jaw Jacobs chuck. This, similar to the 3-jaw universal chuck, has 3 independent jaws that move together and grab hold of something round. In this case, it's a drill bit. On the back side, there is that taper, and that fits into the tailstock. Now, how do I remove my live center to put in my 3-jaw Jacobs chuck for drilling? Well, on the tailstock, there are some graduations. It looks like a ruler. And on the back here, let me slide this forward. On the back here, there's a hand wheel. And as I rotate the hand wheel, you'll see that this moves. Well, if I go underneath 1 inch, it pops out the live center. I then need to bring this back out over 1 inch, and then I'm good to feed that in. Now if I want to drill, I can turn that crank wheel, and this moves forward. Unlike a normal hand drill, here the bit is stationary and the work itself is spinning. So we've talked about the headstock and the tailstock. Now it's time to talk about this thing in the middle. This is the carriage. Kind of like a horse. The headstock, tailstock, the carriage carries the people in the middle. This is what we use to move and control that tool that goes into the side of the work. There are a lot of handles right here. They all have a job, so let's talk about them. The first thing that we want to do is move the entire carriage along the work. This large hand wheel at the bottom is the longitudinal slide. So this moves it along the work. Next thing that we need to do is move the tool into the work, into and away from the work. And for that, we use the cross slide. So here I turn this smaller hand wheel, and the tool goes into the work. This even smaller hand wheel above that now combines the two. There's an angle gauge under here. Ours is set to 45 most of the time, but we can adjust it. This is our compound slide. And here, it'll move the tool at an angle, right now at a 45. When I'm using the lathe, I want this compound slide to be as far forward as possible all the time, especially when I'm just facing off the side or the front of a piece of work. There are no guards or stops in this machine, and if you back this compound slide up enough, you'll see that this corner of the slide is missing some chunks of steel, and that's because a kid was trying to use this machine with the compound slide all the way back, and the lathe just drove itself into itself. The chuck started hitting the compound slide, steel on steel, we have an issue. So just keep that compound slide all the way forward. Above that, we have the tool post. Tool post and then the tool holder. That little piece of metal is the tool. This is a round nose tool in there right now. And that is moved up into the work. We hold this on the tool post. That slides down, and I can lock it in place. Earlier we mentioned the lead screw, and that the lead screw comes out of the headstock. Well, the lead screw travels along here, and it transfers motion from the headstock to the carriage. This longitudinal slide is the only one that has an auto feed option. Everything else you have to manually control. The longitudinal slide, there is an option for it to drive itself. This handle right here is for power feed. So when you push it down, power feed is on. What it does is engages a half nut on that lead screw. When it's up, it's off. This is not moving. But when you want to turn that power feed on, turn that down. Now, again, there's no safeties and no guards, there's no automatic stops. This will drive itself to bits. So be careful when you're using auto feed. It's a great feature, but you just have to be paying attention. You have to be paying attention all the time when you're machining, but especially when you're doing this. Finally, there's a black lever over here. This is how we turn the lathe on. Where it's sitting right now is neutral. It's off. It's off anyways because the headstock is not engaged, nothing's powered up. But down turns the work towards the operator, and up turns it away. We always go down. We drive it forward. But going up drives it in reverse. So, let's turn it on. I'm not going to cut anything in this video. That's for the next video. But I've decided I want to be at 600 revolutions per minute. So, that is C3. Uh-oh. There we go. C3. Set. Reset. Pop that out. Power. I hear a click. We are ready to go. I'm going to press the inch button just to make sure that the transmission is engaged and ready. That sounds good. Now, I'm grabbing this, putting it out from neutral, and down. The lathe is spinning. The chuck is holding the work. The lead screw is also spinning. I can now manually control the carriage to cut. Again, I'm not going to do that this video. But also, I can engage the auto feed by pressing this down. And now it moves along by itself. I'm paying attention to make sure it doesn't drive itself to bits. Disengage. Put the handle back into neutral. Now the machine is not off. The machine is ready to go again. So to turn it off, I press the reset button. Another thing about the reset. Yes, reset will turn the machine off if the handle is in the on position. Let's do that. Which is a great safety feature. Another safety feature is I'm using the lathe, I got confused, I'm getting used to it, and I turned it off with the reset button instead of with this handle. So this handle is still in the on position. Reset, power, inch. Uh-oh, what's going on? Power, inch, nothing. That's because the handle is down. That's another safety feature. Now I'm good. So we went over the three main parts of the lathe today and the three functional categories. So the headstock, tailstock, and carriage, and the three functional categories, which are driving the lathe. I can do that up here at the headstock and in the carriage, and controlling the drill bit, right? I'm driving the lathe there. Holding and rotating the work. I hold it with the chuck, and then it rotates because of the spindle. And then holding and moving the cutting tool. I hold the cutting tool up top on the tool post, and then I can move the carriage to interact that tool with the work. I can also move a drill bit into the work. These machines are incredible. They are dangerous. There are no guards. There's no safety protection installed to the machine, right? So, safety glasses, no long hair, no headphones. You don't want to be distracted by anyone. So if your friend comes over to talk to you and you're working, make sure you turn the machine off, say, hey, I'm working, go away, or you just talk to them then. But do not get distracted while you're using this thing. In the next video, we are going to go over a little bit of cutting and also drilling with this. When you are in school, we will be taking a safety quiz on this machine. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to help. This has been the Lathe Lesson 1.